welcome to another Hayley-Roxanna crafts video on crocheting. In my last video about crocheting, I demonstrated how to crochet a traditional granny square like this. And I said how it may need blocking to ensure that it is a proper square. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I block my squares when I crochet. But first, I'm going to explain what is meant by blocking crochet. So I have got some notes to read from, so just forgive me if I'm looking down a bit while I'm explaining what blocking is. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything out. So blocking is a method used in knitting and crochet to shape the fabric made to achieve a more finished look. So whilst I'll demonstrate using a square, similar methods can be used to block pretty much anything made in yarn that needs blocking. Essentially, when blocking, moisture is added to the fabric and then it is shaped and fixed in place, usually using pins as most common. That's what I'll be doing, or you can even get wires that you can sort of weave into the work to hold the shape whilst your piece is left to dry. Blocking is a way of evening out tension and especially for open work, showing off the pattern. Blocking is also used to help flatten where the work might have curled, highlight stitch definition and enhance the look of lace or textured stitches. It can also help to evenly shape pieces, which just makes the finished item look better. Blocking can also help even out the size of an item. So it's particularly helpful if you are going to be joining the squares together to make sure that the squares are the same size or at least a similar size before you join them. Generally, you cannot make an item smaller by blocking, but you can increase it a small amount depending on the stitch pattern. Blocking can be done in various ways, and like most methods in crochet and just crafting in general, there isn't really a right or a wrong way. It's more about finding what works best for you and for the yarn that you're working with. So I'll show you the methods that I use, and I'll also describe some alternatives that you may like to try. So you can block your crochet either before or after weaving in the ends. Today I haven't got the ends weaved in completely, but normally I do weave my ends in before I will block work. But this is something that is just personal preference. You can block the individual parts of your crochet project. So if it's a project made up of squares, rectangles, I will tend to block them in parts, or you can block the whole of your finished project. So if I'm making an item that maybe isn't made up of squares, then I will block the whole thing once it's all put together. So something like a cardigan maybe, or a jumper. I will block my finished item instead, but again, this is personal preference. I generally block using a wet method. Although some people prefer not to use this method when working with acrylic yarns. So before blocking, you need to wet the fabric with the wet method. And to do this, you can soak it in some cool or room temperature water for 15 to 30 minutes. If you do this though, you will then need to carefully squeeze out any excess water without sort of wringing your project or scrunching it up at all, because this can alter the shape. One way you can do this is pop your finished project when it's wet onto a towel, roll the towel up and gently press on it, just to squeeze out excess water, because you don't want your project actually dripping before you block it. It just needs to be wet. An alternative, and what I prefer to do, is to spray my crochet with cold water. I use this water bottle, this sprayer. This one was from Wilco's. You can pick them up in a lot of places, especially like places that sell like garden stuff, flowers and things. This one's quite large. You can get smaller bottles. This was just what was available at the time when I was buying one. And then you can spray your piece with this. I'm not actually going to spray it today just because of my filming surface being down. But what I would suggest is when you are spraying work, you pop a towel down first, just to gather any excess water. Because take it from experience, if you don't do this, you will probably find you stand in a wet patch when you've blocked your crochet. When you come to move, you will find the wet patch on the floor if you don't put your towel down first. So pop your crochet project onto a towel, spray the front, and you want to make sure your crochet project is wet all the way through. So what I do, once I've sprayed it on the front, I will flip it over and then give the back a spray. So particularly if you're working with thicker yarns, this is probably needed, just to make sure that it is wet all the way through. And when I say wet, I don't mean you don't want it dripping, so you've then got to wring it out like you do if you've soaked it first. You just want it to be damp, really. And then once you've done that, you are ready to pin out your work, ready for drying. So once your crochet project is damp, you then need to pin it out. And you can invest in a blocking board for doing this. Blocking boards are especially good for blocking squares. As you can block a number of squares at the same time using these. They come with these like pegs. Don't quite know what I call them pegs, which slot into the holes on the board. Mine's by Yarn Mania. There are a whole variety of these that are available though. And what I do when I am blocking on my blocking board is I put my pegs in first to where I want it. So I know I want to block this square to 10 centimetres, and the gap between each hole is a centimetre. So we just need to do 10 gaps to get 10 centimetres. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Pop the peg in there. Same coming down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And pop my peg in there. That's it. This is just how I do it. It works for me. Whether it's the correct way, I don't know. So I put the pegs in for the corners, and then I like to just spread a couple of pegs sort of evenly, or as evenly as I can, between my corners. Okay, so like I said, you just push the pegs in. Try and make sure that they are up straight. They tend to go in straight anyway, so it's not much of a problem. You can get longer pins as well. So if you want to block more squares at the same time, you can always invest in those too. I find on these, I tend to be able to get 6, 8, it sort of depends on the thickness of the yarn you're using, but 6 to 8 squares on one quite comfortably. I've got excess pins because obviously if you want to do something larger, you're going to need more pins. So then you put your work onto the pins. So I always start by doing my corners first, over the corner pins. You want to make sure you are actually in the corner. Some people like to go just down the hole. I prefer to try and get the stitches on where I can, or the chains. And then I work my way round the sides, putting them on. And you just need to try and do it so that it is evenly pinned out. Sometimes they can ping off a little bit and you have to put them back on. And there we go. And then just push that down. And then you can, if you think it's dipping a little bit between some of the pins, just push it out slightly. And when you've got others then sat on top, they will all hold in place. And when they're wet as well, they tend to stay there easier. And then you just leave it there to dry. So blocking boards though can be costly. So if it's something that's too much for you, I have seen some people who will drill holes into some scrap wood, like scrap sheets of MDF, and use like wooden doweling, thin wooden doweling, and pop those in. And some people will just put them in the corners when they're blocking. I prefer to have pegs holding the sides as well, just because I think this helps to make the shape a bit clearer and just looks better to me. It's a personal preference thing. So that's how I block on a blocking board. So an alternative to using a blocking board is to use a foam mat to pin the fabric out on, especially if the piece is bigger than your blocking board. Obviously this isn't a problem here, but it might be. You can get foam mats that are gridded, especially for blocking, but I just use these kids foam play mats that fit together, so you can fit a few together to make a larger area to pin your work out on. The ones that are specifically made for blocking also come in like a jigsaw format, so that you can put those together as well to create a larger area for your blocking. So to block on a foam mat, you then need pins to put into your work to hold it down. So I've got these pins that are specifically blocking pins. I can get one out to show you. They are T-shaped. But equally, I have seen people just use normal sort of dressmaking pins to pop in your work as well. Sometimes though, they don't always hold your work so well, as it can sort of pop over. The stitches can sort of pop off. Whereas with these, you can sort of position it so that the stitches are trapped underneath to help hold the shape. So when you're blocking with these, you then just need to spread the pins out over the shape that you want to hold it. So it is advised when you're doing this to pop a pin in the middle to start with, like so, and then just use your fingers to ease it out. As you can see, these pins don't actually go all the way through, which is fine. They don't need to. It depends on what surface you've got underneath. Sometimes I will put like towels and things underneath, so my pins will go down further, but because I'm working on a hard surface, that's as far as they're going to go in today. And then the best thing to do when you're doing this, it is best to have a ruler or a measuring tape. I haven't got one to hand, so you'll just have to imagine, and pop your ruler across your work to get it to the size you want. Obviously, if you buy the actual gridded mat, you then don't need to do that because the measurements are on those. And then you just gently push with your fingers to get your work to where you want it and pop your pins in. It's advised to pin edges first when you're doing it this way. So like so. And if you're doing a larger piece than this, you will need probably more pins around the edge than what I've put. And then once you're happy with your sides pinned, just work your way until you have pinned your corners out. And like I said, if you were doing this and you've got a mat like mine that isn't actually gridy, I mean, you could draw grids on if you wanted to. But if you haven't, you just need a ruler or a measuring tape. Make sure it's a waterproof one because you have got water about, just to sort of measure to make sure that it is evenly spread or to the size that you want. Okay, and you just push. And again, if you get dips anywhere, sometimes if you're stretching it a bit further, you might get a slight dip in the side. You can just ease it out with your fingers, and even pop an extra pin or two in. It's better to have more pins in than not enough. And then, again, leave it until it's dry. I've also seen people pin out their crochet on folded towels. And I've even seen people use cardboard when they're blocking and drawing pins. So there are really cheap alternative ways of blocking than actually buying the actual equipment. It's just whichever way you use, you just need to make sure that you leave your crochet project on there until it is completely dry. And this can take, depending on what the weather's like, how hot your rooms are, it can take anywhere from a couple of hours. I often leave my work for at least 24 hours to make sure that it is fully dry. So another way of blocking is to use the steam method. Now this is something that I've not actually tried yet, but I have been looking into it, as it's a method that seems to be recommended when you are using acrylic yarn, which is something I do use a lot of. So steam blocking is sometimes called dry blocking or heat blocking, and with this method you pin out your crochet project, what you want to block, first to the shape and the size that you want it to be, and then you steam the fabric to relax the fibres before leaving it to dry. It is recommended to use a garment steamer for this, but you can also use an iron. However, if you are using an iron, you need to ensure that you hover an inch or so above your work, as you don't want the iron to touch your work at all, as this can cause the acrylic fibres to melt, make a mess and ruin your hard work. I've also seen that people have used or suggested putting a towel over your crochet project, or even just some cotton fabric before you use the iron, again just for that added extra bit of protection, so you keep your iron away from your actual work. It's just the steam out of it that you want. So like I said, with this method, once you've steamed it, again you have to leave the item pinned out until it is dry, just to make sure that it is actually blocked and it will hold its shape. So that's all the method that I have used or that I want to try for blocking my crochet projects. There are probably other ways too that I've not even discovered yet. But like I said at the beginning, you need to do what works for you. You need to find how you're happy blocking projects. And sometimes projects don't even need to be blocked. For example, if you're doing amigurumi, that very rarely needs blocking. Sometimes accessories and homewares, they don't need blocking. Personally, I don't always block a finished project if it's made up of squares, because I will have blocked the squares before joining them together anyway. So I then don't feel that it's necessary to actually block the finished crochet project as well. And when I'm making blankets, blankets that aren't made up of squares, where you've done sort of rows at a time, I don't block my finished blankets, partly because the space that's needed sometimes to block a blanket, if it's a particularly large one, can make it difficult. But often I find I'm happy with my blanket as it is. I don't feel that they always need blocking. But again, all of this is just my personal preference, and you need to do what works for you and what you are happy with. So that's everything. If you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them for you. I've put links in the description to items that I've either shown you or talked about in this video. And that's it. So thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye!